Hello, and thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. My name is Klaus Petersen. I work for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, responsible for our vertical work in the telco segment, supporting our customers in the telecommunications industry with our infrastructure solutions. Today, I'll be talking about the challenges that telcos and also providers to vendors to telcos face as we are building out the new open networks that are coming, and in particular necessary here as we move to the 5G with the container-based architectures and much more aggressive use of IT-based technology, cloud technologies in the networks. So as we move to more open networks, there's some challenges involved. And really, in order to understand those challenges, we have to be aware that the move to open networks require telcos disaggregate their networks in different dimensions. The first one is, as telcos take more control of the architecture, that is the choice of technologies and the long-term strategy in terms of those technologies that make up the network at a level where before they would leave it to their vendors to make choices. So that's the architectural disaggregation. And in that architectural disaggregation, we are also facing choices. Do you want to go with virtualization, with containers? How do you move from one to the other? So that in itself is a significant amount of expertise that telcos need to acquire in order to make these choices. The second level of disaggregation, or second dimension of disaggregation, again, in order to achieve this openness, is to start procuring separately. Again, in the old world, everything was procured from one vendor that would build the network end to end. Now, in procurement disaggregation, obviously, that's a way of taking advantage of competition in the different layers rather than just at the solution as a whole. So in that sense, for acquiring, say, compute infrastructure that is necessary to build up the networks, you can see competition between vendors like Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and our competitors in that domain. But that's only real in terms of the telco itself, if the telco chooses to procure these elements independently. And again, in doing that, there's an amount of expertise, extra work involved in terms of setting up the procurement structure and having the expertise in procurement department to actually make these choices. So rather than buying networks, buy components. And finally, when we look at how networks are being built, the choice of who actually owns the final assembly, if you will. Do you use a particular vendor to deliver everything and make it work end to end? Or does the carrier take responsibility for that and just have the different elements delivered? And all models are going on in the industry. But the bottom line of this is, in order to take control of all these different parts of the value chain and take advantage of the competition, be able to use at a more fine-grained level the innovation of the industry, the carriers, the telcos are insourcing risk because they will need to do things that they have not been responsible for before. And that's really the essence of what I'm discussing today, is what is Hewlett-Packard Enterprise doing to help our customers, both the telcos as well as the vendors to the telco, to manage this risk and help you build infrastructures that will carry forward in time, be able to absorb the many different generations of technology that will go into, for example, the 5G networks, and at the same time maintain your competitiveness through the most advanced technologies. To go over that at a very high level, obviously Hewlett-Packard Enterprise has been in the business of helping carriers and vendors build telco networks for a long time. We were the first company that actually enabled standard enterprise servers for telco networks with all the environmental testing, etc., and made sure that the cost curve, the innovation curve that comes from the IT industry at large became available in the telco networks themselves. So no more special source for servers, if you will, except that's not quite true. As we are really pushing the boundaries, taking user plane application and pushing them onto standard IT systems, with the amount of bandwidth that needs to be managed, etc. Additional hardening and work needs to be done at the operating system and hardware level to really make sure that these systems are tuned, not just at an individual component level, i.e. server level, for example, but as a full stack as well, get the right balance between all the different elements that sit and make up a rack for a particular application that is part of the network, whether it's the packet core, VoLTE, whatever. So we do the work at the lower level with all the tuning, and then we put together blueprints that are, if you will, reference architectures for full stacks up to and including the virtualization technology. So we work with our partners such as Red Hat and VMware to make sure that the full stack really works. And we develop and deliver also a tool set that makes it easier to deploy those full stacks should our customers choose to use them. Typically, it takes about a week for a very skilled technician to build up a full rack, do all the wiring, and then actually install the virtualization layer and get it all up and running, ready for VNF installation. And with our tools, it can be done in about a day. We're also looking at the economical risk. Obviously, it'll be a while before we run every carrier application in the public cloud, but we can deliver many of the benefits that you would see from the public cloud by using what HP referred to as HPE GreenLake. It's our as-a-service offering for all what we sell, and we can even integrate with partners. So rather than going for a full CapEx model, you can choose to lower the financial risk in the deployment, getting overcapacity from HP installed from day one, and then pay as you go for the usage of the platform technology, the infrastructure that we have provided, and potentially also from the partners that we may be working with at the software layer and higher levels of the stack. Finally, and I'll be talking more about this, is manageability of the infrastructure. There's obviously new challenges involved in these multi-vendor heterogeneous infrastructures that make up the networks. And I'll be talking some to what Hewlett Packard Enterprise has been doing to simplify that and enable the consistent management of what is effectively a heterogeneous distributed cloud made up of multi-vendors equipment. So I'll go into a little bit more detail on that one as we talk about this, but all what we do can be put under the headline of enabling you, our customers, to deploy networks at lower risk, low cost, and get faster time to revenue by us picking up some of the challenges, some of the risk that it just does not pay off, if you will, for you to do yourself. And what it makes sense to do for you yourself is clearly a business choice. It's a matter of what R&D capacity and expertise have you got in-house. So there's not a one-size-fits-all. But this shows the full breadth of all what we do at the infrastructure level for our customers. Now, Hewlett Packard Enterprise has other businesses that are helping our telco customers at the software level as well, the system integration level at higher levels of the stack, but I will not be talking about that today. So let us just talk a little bit about what's happening on the edge of the network. That's obviously a topic of great interest at the moment. We are seeing O-RAN, vRAN starting to really take hold. HPE is involved in some of the most advanced developments and early deployments that are taking place right now. And also we are seeing a lot of interest from carriers and partners of carriers to put value-added application on the edge of the network, primarily focused in vertical areas, vertical segments, where the proximity of the computation, the ability to really tune the application for the large enterprise need is of high value, and it therefore makes sense for the telcos to enter the market. In all cases, it requires additional compute technology, storage, data center style networking, and management of all that to be pushed further out towards the edge of the network. And that increases the complexity even further. There's obviously a challenge when you move, instead of managing one big data center, as you see or two, when you suddenly move to many central office-like locations. That's the challenge the industry has been dealing with so far. But once we go to virtualizing the RAN in the 5G environment and support of all these industrial applications where some of the carrier or telcos technology may actually be on-prem in factory locations, etc., the problem of the distributed management multiplies even further. And that's why we have put particular effort on that particular topic as well. What are the challenges that comes out of this? You know, obviously, at the moment when you acquire a set of solutions even if you put it on a common cloud, you end up with very different management tools and stacks depending on how you acquire it. That integration, which you can do at higher levels of the stack, is costly because it's fundamentally work that we believe should be pushed down. Automation and orchestration need to be layered with the networks layering as well. And that's not necessarily happening today. We are seeing low-level interfaces like IPMI still being used for management. There's Redfish, there's proprietary infrastructure. There's a multiplicity of ways of managing the fabric when you want to set up networks for a particular application. And all this implies cost and risk. Obviously, the networks themselves, the fact that you're pushing IT-style technology out in facilities where it didn't used to exist, requires different form factors, and also again implies the fact that it's distributed, and in order to maintain the competitive pressure on your vendors, that you will depend on being able to acquire this in a multi-vendor manner. Okay, and there's a lot of challenges involved in that we needs to be absorbed up in the higher management level and hidden, if you will, that heterogeneity, because otherwise it implies cost. So it may be more efficient from an acquisition perspective to buy from two vendors because you can push down the cost. You end up with two vendors in the network, and if you can't manage their equipment consistently, you're paying in the operating cost of the equipment. The total cost of ownership obviously goes up. The whole notion of the distributed cloud that needs to be able to aggregate is also coming out with some of our tier one hyperscalers and the partnerships we're seeing there. And that is technology that we need to make sure migrate into the networks as they're getting built for 5G. It's not something that we can fit as a post activity, and therefore we need to get going now on integrating those technologies, and that's what we are looking at as well. And finally, the whole notion of separating management based on location, what we here refer to as the closed solutions, is no longer a viable option for the networks, because there needs to be consistency. Things like the user plane function that happily lift in this further into the core of the network needs to be pushed out on the edge in many cases when you're delivering. Latency sensitive application network slicing on the edge. In other instances, you don't need to do that. And you need to be able to migrate the applications between locations just based on the specific use cases and the need for distribution. So these are all of the challenges that comes out of this network. So what is Hewlett-Packard Enterprise doing about it? So HPE, or Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, is investing in a number of areas in order to facilitate the development of edge application and support the deployment of vRAN. The most obvious one is that we have a set of platforms today that are already designed to be deployed towards the edge of the network in more hostile environmental situations, and to facilitate the inclusion of all the different types of accelerators and operating environments that are necessary to meet the demands of vRAN as a workload. It's obviously significantly more challenging than most things we've done in these smaller form factors. And you will see an ongoing set of platforms being released as the industry matures and more work gets done there. As part of that, we obviously also in the area of vRAN working with partners, and part of some of the more sophisticated deployments that are taking place today. The element in the middle there, or InfoSight, is about predictive maintenance. This is an area where HPE is very strong, and we are deploying that in telco networks as well. As we move from deployment at a few sites to thousands of sites, it's critical that any issues that may arise in the infrastructure that's being deployed on the edge of the network gets raised as soon as possible. For example, if somebody has deployed, say, memory in the server too close to a processor, it sounds like a silly thing, but that means that the memory will run warmer, and the mean time to failure of that memory eventually will go down. So that's the kind of thing that gets pointed out, that you can now, next time you're on site and you need to do maintenance anyway, you might just want to move those DIMMs out and thereby extend the life of the operational of the server before other sort of measures needs to be taken. Many other areas, as consistency of the security patches, etc., can of course be managed through this as well, and it becomes critical as you have all these sites. Finally, HPE has recognized the real challenge that the industry is facing in order to enable the deployment of multi-vendor heterogeneous equipment at this scale of distribution. It is just not economically viable, and there's too high a risk involved with today's management tools. And it doesn't make any sense that every vendor and every carrier needs to implement their own tools and do their own custom integration. So HPE has kicked off an initiative that we call Open Distributed Infrastructure Management, ODIM for short, that is set out to solve this problem with the industry as a completely open proposition. And I'll go a little more into detail on that on the following slides. I will dive a little bit into that. It's a new initiative that Hewlett Packard Enterprise has kicked off recently, and it's worth an extra mention here with a little more detail. So what we've been up to is we've created, if you will, a common data model that allows management of all the different IT-based technologies that make up the network. It's fundamentally a data model that allows you to inspect and manage the infrastructure at a vendor independent layer. It's made up of a couple of elements that have both been submitted to open source through the Linux Foundation. So the full implementation was delivered from day one, developed from day one with a view to put it into open source. It's now there. HPE also offers an implementation that we support fully, of course, as part of this, but everything is available in open source through the Linux Foundation, and we look forward to more companies joining. There's already a good set that are there active in the technical committee and helping us develop this further. But the real point here is that as a user of this, you can structure your management on top of all of this, independent of location of your technology and independent of which vendor provided it. So if you want to set up a network path between two servers, you don't actually need to know the underlying switch equipment. It could be for multiple vendors, and what are the exact server models and what are the NIC cards involved, etc. You can do that higher level composition in a layered manner using this common data model, and you would get telemetry information at that same level and information generally about the system underlying. So what have we done to make this happen? Well, for a start, we obviously worked with an ecosystem of partners, including Intel and others, to recognize the exact problems and make sure that we really solve what was necessary to solve. We have had standards ratified in the DMTF, and again, these are available now, both for aggregation, which manages distribution, as well as the fabric management. We've had all that standardized, and then we had launched an open source implementation of those standards into the Linux Foundation, where it's now actively being developed with further functionality by the participating vendors. So this is not an HPE proposition. It's really a proposition for the industry to help layer not just the hardware, but also the management of those systems, or automation orchestration can operate independent of the vendors from which you acquire that technology. And we believe that's absolutely critical to make the use of open technology on the edge of the networks economically viable, because otherwise we'll be introducing and multiplying the complexity of the network at a level where it really becomes economically not viable. So with that, my time is up. I appreciate you having spent time today. There's a number of other areas where Hewlett Packard Enterprise can help you as you build out your 5G networks and generally refresh networks and want to take more aggressive use of the most sophisticated technologies that the IT industry can bring. And I look forward to engaging with you and your teams in order to provide more information here after the session. Thank you very much for your time, and look forward to talk to you soon. All right.